Now, without further ado, time to say a very good morning to Mr. John Rentoul, Chief Political Commentator from The Independent. John, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. I thought you were introducing me as from Independent Sage. Well, I may be from The Independent, but I'm not from Independent Sage, and I'm not from the what does SAGE actually stand for? I've forgotten. Scientific
Advisory Group of Emergency whatever's. Yeah, I mean, listen, in times in the future, you'll probably be very happy that you were never associated with such an outrageously wrong gang of people, because here we are following the science, right? And the science is taking us all over the place. Now we finally get Neil Ferguson at the weekend telling us actually that herd immunity may have already been achieved in London. Because so many people have actually got the disease. It's extraordinary, isn't it?
I'm not sure he said that. I think
he did say exactly that to the Sunday Times.
A third of people might have had coronavirus in London. That's not herd immunity yet by any means.
No, but it does. Would you like me to read you the quote?
Go on.
That may be slightly aided by the fact that there is quite a lot of herd immunity in places like London. Maybe 25% or 30% of the population has now been infected in the first wave and the second wave. So that adds to the reduction of transmission. That's his direct quote.
Right, yeah, but that's not herd immunity, is it? I mean, that just means there's an element of herd immunity. And it means that it might be easier to achieve herd immunity through vaccination. So that's a good thing.
Well, I think the point is that you and I both know, John, as much as we've now learnt, as we did during Brexit, about international trade, we've now learnt an awful lot about virology. I get accused all the time of not being a scientist. People say to me, well, what do you know about it? Well, I've been doing it day in, day out for about the best part of the last 400 bloody days. That's why I know about it. And here's the point. Herd immunity can be achieved by two things. One, vaccinations, and two, infections. And they don't yet know how long those infections keep you immune. However, you have to say, you can't say on the one hand, oh, look, we've got 1 in 20 people infected, as Sadiq Khan said at the weekend. And that has no effect on herd immunity, because it does.
No, absolutely. And that's, that does mean that the vaccination program should work more quickly than it otherwise would, which is a good thing. But it's interesting that you're blaming the scientists and blaming the politicians for having followed scientific advice.
No, I'm not blaming anyone. I didn't blame anyone for anything. All I said is that they're following the science and it's leading them all over the place because it keeps changing.
Yeah, but that's interesting because it's different from what the common criticism of Boris Johnson is, that he's been too slow to follow the scientific advice. So this is obviously going to be the big question for the public inquiry whenever it comes in about 2055, I should think.
A year after we stop the lockdowns,
to establish whether Boris Johnson's defence is that he followed the science, or whether the scientists got it wrong, or whether the politicians got it wrong by not following the science.
I mean, I think there's no question that there is still quite a bit of resistance within Downing Street of those who want more lockdowns faster, and those like Boris who would rather not do it, as every time he gets up and makes a speech that he doesn't want to make, it feels like he's been forced into it by events, doesn't it?
Well, that's right. And by the majority in the cabinet, led by Michael Gove, which is quite surprising, and Matt Hancock. But Rishi Sunak seems to have fallen silent. He was the leader of the Keep the Economy Open fact. He seems to have kept his counsel recently.
Well, you know what's interesting, and you will have read this as I did, you may have even written it over the course of the weekend, that so-called lockdown skeptics, of which we would count Rishi Sunak as one, have had to kind of go a little bit quiet because the numbers are so large that we're now seeing in hospitals and in the death rates that, it's a bit difficult to argue that, this is not a big problem. There's clearly a very big problem here. But I would still argue, as a lockdown skeptic, which I count myself as, that, is it still too much too soon? Are we doing too much to kill off the economy? Because in my view, I know we've only been in this for a week. It's not really working as yet. 3,000 people died over the weekend. That doesn't sound to me like we've, somehow got a grip of the virus, and we're told that it's out of control.
Well, yeah, but what's the alternative, Mike? I mean, that's the question. I mean, it may not be working absolutely, but the alternative may be worse.
Well, it may be, but it also may not be worse in terms of what is going on in the rest of the community. where people are trying to, get medical help for various problems that they've got. I was sent a story by a listener over the weekend about a family member who died, went into hospital, had lung problems anyway, emphysema and that kind of thing, went into hospital without COVID, was tested negative on the first instance, was then put in a COVID ward by accident, caught COVID, and then died. So there are lots of things that are not working well, and lots of people who are being affected badly by this lockdown.
Yeah, but most of those things are not going to be helped by having more coronavirus cases around rather than fewer. So I do think the two important things that have changed are the new variant, which is more infectious.
Yes.
I think that has changed a lot of people's minds, but also the vaccines being approved, which means that locking down the economy it makes more sense if you can see the end point where you can lift the restrictions rather than just locking down as an opening.
And I think that should be the next type of conversation that we start to have as to when we see some kind of target being set, because there doesn't appear to be a target being set in terms of the lockdown. There's targets being set about 2 million vaccines a week. There's targets being set about how to try and reduce the R number, but they don't say at what point and when they've vaccinated enough people, we'll start to be able to lift some of this.
You're absolutely right. And I think there is a danger that what happened last time in the summer, last year, might happen again, which is that the government starts moving the goalposts, because the original aim of locking down and the restrictions was to delay and reduce the number of infections. But as soon as the curve started coming down steeply, the objective switched without anybody saying so to trying to suppress the virus altogether and trying to eliminate it, which was a fool's errand.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. And meanwhile, we enter another week. Parliament technically back today. I'm told there's some kind of a debate. We'll talk about it later on in the show on hospitality, whether there's been a petition filed, I think, where some members of the hospitality business have asked for a minister to be appointed. Do you think there's any likelihood of that?
No, I don't see the point of it.
But I mean, you're rather glib about it, John. But in the end, there's millions of people whose lives depend on hospitality, millions and billions of pounds of money paid into the exchequer from tax. We can't go on like this, just going, oh, don't worry about it. You'll just have to figure something out.
No, but there is a minister for that. There's the Chancellor of the Exchequer, he's called, Rishi Sunak, and he, I think he's very conscious of the fate of the hospitality industry. I mean, he was responsible for Eat Out to Help Out, and he criticised quite a lot for that. But he's very well aware of the danger to people's jobs and livelihoods, and I think he's the minister we should look to. I mean, I think gimmicks like appointing a separate minister for hospitality are just distractions.
Well, what about the gimmick of appointing a separate minister for vaccinations then?
Well, I think that's a distraction too.
Right. Well, I'm glad to see that you're consistent, John. I'm glad to see that here we are once again agreeing on things. Now, what about this Allegra Stratton and the mysterious television studio? Because I happen to know that there was a television studio constructed. There were people hired to start today with the first ever kind of White House style briefing, and it's all been chucked under a bus because apparently they don't want to do it until after the pandemic. What's going on?
Well, I mean, the reason given is that ministers are doing so many of these press conferences. Matt Hancock and the Prime Minister are appearing pretty much, like 3 times a week or something like that. So there's no need for a separate spokesperson to appear on the Prime Minister's behalf. But I suspect there is an element of second thoughts about whether this really is a good idea to have a high-profile person speak for the Prime Minister on television, become a personality in her own right.
Yes.
Thereby acquire a huge amount of power in government, because information is power.
Yeah.
And speaking for the government is a very powerful position.
Yeah, well, if you look back on all the people who were in that position before, in a sort of a less visible way, in a way, because we never really were able to watch the Alistair Campbell press briefings, but you'll remember those, I'm sure, very well. I'm amazed, actually, they found anyone to do the job, because if I was Allegra Stratton, the last thing I'd want to do is get up every day and try and defend Boris Johnson.
Well, it will make her one of the most famous people in the country.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see the attraction. I mean, whether it's possible to do that job well, or whether it is a poisoned chalice, is something that they may well be having second thoughts about now.
Yeah.
I wonder if we'll ever see a sort of daily briefing on camera
Right.
from a Prime Minister spokesperson.
Right.
I mean, all these, there's a sort of boring briefing that goes on every day when Parliament's sitting, which people don't see because it happens on the telephone at the moment. It used to happen in a room in Westminster, another room in Downing Street, which is just going through the sort of business of the day and so on. But that kind of stuff put on television mostly has downside possibilities for the government, I would have thought.
Well, that's what I think as well. What does she do at the moment, Allegra Stratton? I mean, she doesn't really have a briefing on a daily basis at the moment, does she?
She does take part in the daily briefings quite often, yes. Not every day, but quite often.
Right, but I mean, she hasn't sort of taken over en masse, has she?
No, she usually does it with a civil service spokesperson as well as a sort of double act.
Right.
And she's very good at it. It's a very straightforward job, but I think doing that kind of job on camera in public is a very different kind of job, and I think that can only lead to trouble for the government, and I think they're beginning to realise that.
Yes, I think that's probably true. And plus, they haven't U-turned on anything for a couple of days, so probably might as well just do that. Start the week off as you mean to continue. What about old Sir Keir Starmer? He's making a speech today, we believe, just after 11 o'clock. Something that is becoming quite an interesting debate is the business of the elections, isn't it, in May, as to whether some people like Sadiq Khan want them to go ahead, others like the government perhaps don't.
Well, is that how it works? I'm not sure. I think most people ought to wait and see. I mean, I think it's sensible to make contingency plans for postponing it, but we just don't know what it's going to look like. I mean, if the vaccination program is rolled out as fast as it possibly could be, there's no reason why we shouldn't be seeing the restrictions lifted by the end of March, and in which case, May elections should be fine. I mean, after all, they had presidential elections in America, in the middle of a pandemic. It shouldn't be possible. It shouldn't be impossible.
Yeah, but that was all hijacked by the mail-in ballots, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, but I mean, we have fairly liberal postal voting rules.
No, listen, I'm very much in favour of the elections going ahead. The only reason I said what I said is I've heard arguments over the weekend from people like Sadiq Khan, who thinks that obviously he's quite popular at the moment in terms of the way things are going, and he might be less popular once the pandemic's over, in the sense that people will look back and go, well, hang on a minute, are you sure you did the right thing? Whereas for the government, it's kind of the other way around. They'll be more popular once the pandemic's over than they are now. Yeah,
well, that's why I think it all depends on whether the pandemic appears to be under control by.
Yes.
But I mean, I agree with you. I think it is very, very important. I don't think the election should have been postponed last year.
No.
I think very, very important that democracy continues, and I think it's an outrage that Sadiq Khan has been the unelected mayor of London for a year.
Yeah.
And the same goes for Andy Burnham in Manchester, and the Scottish government in Scotland. I think. Except I can't remember if were the Scottish elections postponed. Anyway, it's a bad idea.
I think they were scheduled to happen in May of this year.
That's right. I think we should bust a gut to make sure that they happen this time, and then they're not postponed again.
Yes, no, I think that's absolutely right. So Starmer today, what's he going to be talking about?
It's a boring speech about the economy, Mike. He said all the stuff yesterday when he was interviewed by Andrew Marr on the BBC. He said some very interesting things about Europe. And if there are questions after his economy speech today, they will all be about Europe. I can guarantee that.
Because he's now said there's no point in rejoining, right?
Well, he said he doesn't think there's a case for rejoining the EU, which is an extraordinary thing for the former shadow Brexit secretary to say, the architect of Labour's policy of going to the election, arguing that there should be another referendum in which he would argue very strongly that there was a case for staying in the EU. It's a bit difficult for him to argue now, I think, that there is no case for joining.
Yeah, but I mean, he's been all over the place on this, hasn't he? I mean, he was basically responsible for Brexit policy at the Labour Party in the last election, which was a disaster. You know, because he kept saying to the people in Leave constituencies, "Oh yes, quite right, we should definitely leave," and then to the people in the Remainer constituencies, "Oh yeah, we should definitely stay in."
Yes, but now he's upset the Remainers by saying he doesn't want to rejoin, which is different, which is very, very difficult, because everybody knows that, of course, you know, all other things being equal, he would want to rejoin. He thinks it would be better for us to be in the EU.
So who's he playing to? Is he playing to those red wall seats then?
Yes, I think he is, but I think he's also playing to a view among the sort of centre ground of the electorate, who may well have voted Remain, that the issue has been settled and that the referendum has to be respected, and that means you can't sort of turn round, you know, a few days after we've actually finally completed Brexit with the EU trade deal, and say, right, well, it's time for us to talk about rejoining.
Yeah,
I mean, but the way he put it was inelegant, and designed to provoke quite a lot of Remainers in his own party.
Yes, I think the problem for Keir Starmer is whenever he makes any kind of absolute decision and releases what he believes to be their new policy, he has a problem, because the Labour Party is completely and utterly riven by people who have completely and utterly opposing views about almost everything.
No, I think it's more fundamental than that, actually, Mike. I think it's like Neil Kinnock, who fought one election committed to unilateral disarmament, you know, giving up our nuclear weapons regardless of what other countries did, and then tried to fight another election on the opposite policy of he was going to keep our nuclear weapons and would be prepared to use them as Prime Minister if necessary, which I think the electorate has difficulty coming to terms with. And I think the same problem I mean, you know, membership of the EU is a fundamental political principle. Either you think it's a good idea or a bad idea. We know what Keir Starmer thinks, and he can't go around saying, "Oh, well, I've changed my mind." He just has to say, "Well, it's not an issue for now."
Yeah, but what happened to all those people who said that, you know, when circumstances change, you change your mind? What happened to those people?
Well, circumstances have changed in that we've left the EU, and you know. There doesn't seem to be much point in immediately trying to reverse that decision. But it's impossible for Keir Starmer to say that, you know, he now thinks that he was wrong, and that you know, being outside the EU is better for Britain. I mean, he can't say that, and you know, this is going to be a problem that's going to dog him between now and polling day. When it comes.
I think you're absolutely right, John. Pleasure as ever. Thank you very much indeed, John Rentoul, Chief Political Commentator at The Independent.